Hello English learners, and welcome to another episode of English Lessons with Grammar Man, coming to you from Progressive English, the language school in Zurich, Switzerland. Now be sure to click on the website and have a look around. There's some great learning material on there. There's the opportunity to have Skype lessons and in-person lessons and all sorts of cheat sheets and good learning aids. So check that out. Now today I'm going to talk all about auxiliary verbs. Primarily the three primary auxiliary verbs. Now the word auxiliary is an adjective which means to help or support. And that is exactly what auxiliary verbs do. They help or support the main verb. Now that is why they are often called helping verbs. There are three primary auxiliary verbs. They are be, do, and have. Now, these also include the conjugations. So, be conjugated is in the present, am, is, and are. In the past is was and were. And then be, being, and been. Then we have do. Do includes do, does, and did. And then have is have, has, and had. Now, these three auxiliary verbs can also function as main verbs, which means they can be the only verb in the sentence or in the clause. If they are the only verb in the clause, then they are not functioning as an auxiliary verb. Because to be an auxiliary verb, there must be another verb in the sentence for the auxiliary. Remember, they're also sometimes called helping verbs. So there must be another verb in the clause for the helping verb to help. Okay, makes sense. An example of when they are functioning as main verbs. I am hungry, they did it, and she has the cup. In these sentences, be, have, and do are functioning as main verbs. But in this video, I want to show you the rules about when we use be, have, and do only as auxiliary verbs. So, starting with the auxiliary verb be. We must use the verb be in all the continuous aspects. In the past, the present, and the future. Be conjugated is part of the formula, and it comes before the ing verb. For example, past continuous. I was eating an ice cream yesterday. Present continuous, I'm eating an ice cream now. And future continuous, I will be eating an ice cream at 8 p.m. tonight. We cannot say, I eating ice cream, because the listener does not know if you mean you're eating an ice cream now, if you were eating an ice cream in the past, or even if you plan to eat an ice cream in the future. So, rule number one, the auxiliary verb be always comes before the main verb in the continuous aspect to help the main verb by showing us the tense. Okay, very important part of the formula. Alright, we also use the auxiliary verb be in the passive voice. If you're not familiar with the passive voice, that's okay. I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but just a brief overview. The reason be is used in the passive voice is because it's part of the formula for the passive voice. We form the passive voice with be plus the past participle. An example, my car was broken into last night. Another one, the football match has been cancelled. I have a video coming out next week all about the passive. So be sure to subscribe if you're not already and click that bell to make sure you don't miss out on that one. If you would like more information about the passive voice, I'll go into a lot more detail. Alrighty then, so moving on to the auxiliary verb do. We use do in the simple aspects. Often the word do is omitted. That means left out in positive sentences. But very often we use do in questions and negatives. Couple of examples, the present simple first. Does water boil at 100 degrees? Negative, I don't eat meat. And then some examples in the past simple. A negative, he didn't walk to the shop. And a question, why did they move house? And lastly, that brings us up to have. Now, have is the auxiliary verb used in all of the perfect tenses. We must use have in all the perfect simple and perfect continuous aspects. So the past, the present, and the future, perfect simple and perfect continuous. It is a part of all of these formulas. Have and has are always used in the present perfect, and had must be used in the past perfect. For the future perfect, have, the base verb have, must be used. Let's start with the present perfect. With perfect tenses, remember we always use the past participle. So that is the third form of the verb. The auxiliary verb helps the past participle. The past participle is carrying the meaning and is the main verb, but we need the auxiliary verb before the past participle to help it, and to help it form a grammatically correct sentence. An example of the present perfect. I have been to China. Another one. He has lived there for 5 years. So we couldn't say, I've been to China. That's incorrect. We must say, I have been to China. Or if we said with the second example there, if we said, he lived there for 5 years, that would completely change the meaning. That would be past simple, which means he doesn't live there anymore. But the meaning we wanted to convey is using the past perfect, which is using the present perfect, which is he has lived there for 5 years. This means he still lives there now. So you can see how important these little verbs are. Another example, we'll talk about the past perfect. This time we must use had. An example sentence, we had started cooking when our guests arrived. With this example, it means that we started cooking before our guests arrived. But if we made the mistake again and forgot our little auxiliary verb, had, this time for the past perfect, then the sentence would become past simple. We started cooking when our guests arrived. Now this means that we started cooking when or after our guests arrived. So leaving out our little auxiliary verb creates the opposite meaning. A little demonstration so that you can see how important these little auxiliary verbs are. Yes, and finally I'll give you an example of the future perfect. I'll do a future perfect continuous just to mix it up a bit. So she will have been studying for 6 years by the time she graduates. You got the auxiliary verb in there again, have. Yes, another important point is we almost always contract auxiliary verbs in spoken English. In written English, especially formal business correspondence, we write uncontracted. So we would say, I have been to China. Okay, the long form. But in spoken English, we sound a bit like a robot if we talk like that. I have been to China. So instead, we would say, I've been to China. Another example, he's lived there for 5 years. We'd already started cooking when our guests arrived. Okay, not we had already started cooking when our guests arrived. No, it sounds a bit like RoboCop. Okay, only famous robot I can think of. But we should shorten everything, okay? So we'd already started cooking when our guests arrived in spoken English. Very important to contract words in spoken English to make you sound fluent, sound like a native speaker. It makes a huge difference. So that's a wrap anyway, guys. That's a nice little overview of auxiliary verbs. I hope that I've made it clear for you. Just remember, the 3 primary auxiliary verbs are be, do, and have. Remember how to conjugate them. So have and do are very easy. We have, has, and in the past had. We have do, does, and did. Be is be, being, and been. And then I am, you are, he, she, it is. And then the past is was and were. If you use past continuous, present continuous, or future continuous, you must use be before the verb ing. Very important. If you are using present simple or past simple, especially negatives and questions, you often, but not always, use do. And finally, all the present perfect aspects in past, present, and future, continuous or simple, need the auxiliary verb have before the past participle. So you can see how important these little verbs are and how often they are used in sentences. As always, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Any questions, just leave them in the comment section and I'll reply to them. Any videos you would like me to make, leave that in the comment section and I'll make a video just for you. Thanks for watching. Please share the video with friends, subscribe, ring the bell, all the good stuff, and most importantly, good luck with your English goals and life goals. Cheers!